Welcome back to another episode of Right Here in Mass. Joining me today is Rebecca Reiner, who has put a lifetime of heart into humanitarianism, activism, and stewardship. In her role as Sincere Foundation's executive director, she leads grant review and is excited to collaborate with organizations that do critical work in their communities. Rebecca, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. I'm excited to dive more into what you do at the Sincere Foundation and what
Sure.
led you there. But I would love to start there is just talk about what it is that you do within this organization and how you
Yeah.
came to join it.
Yeah. So, Sincere Foundation is a private corporate foundation of Sincere Corporation. Sincere Corporation, which is a Massachusetts company, had been around for a while, and their CEO, Matt Douglas, was really interested in figuring out how Sincere could be more targeted and thoughtful about the giving that they were doing. As they got more successful, people would ask for sponsorships, and they were getting a lot of requests, and they were trying to target how they were going to do the giving. And after a lot of conversation, Matt and I had a lot of conversation, and I said, you really need to start a corporate foundation. It will allow you to put some guide rails up about what you will and will not fund. And you can grow it from there, right? You start putting money into a foundation, and you can grow that and see how much impact the company can have. So he finally said, yeah, let's do it. That was we incorporated at the end of 2022 as a foundation. We are classified as a private foundation with the IRS, but we are a corporate foundation, which means we don't raise money from outside sources. It all comes from Sincere Corporation. And our grant reviewers, and at this point, our grant reviewers and our board are all comprised from people within Sincere Corporation.
Oh, and amazing. So with the way that it works, is it that Sincere takes some of their profit and that's what goes into the foundation? Can employees
Correct.
contribute to it? I'd love to hear kind of that process.
No, at this point, it's not something employees can contribute to. It's basically profit from Sincere is moved over to the foundation. So it is exclusively funded by profits of the company.
Oh, amazing. And I'd love to hear, since you became incorporated, as you said, at the end of 2022,
Yeah.
what are some of the things that you've been able to fund or exciting projects that you've been a part of with the foundation?
So we welcome proposals and applications from any registered 501(c)(3) within Massachusetts, which means it's an organization that can be doing work outside of Massachusetts, but we want to fund programs that stay within the state of Massachusetts. And so we have funded to date, I think, 33 different organizations working within our three different funding priorities, which are food security, housing stability, and safe spaces. The foundation really is wanting to address basic needs within our communities. There is such a need for that right now, especially post-pandemic. One in three families or individuals in Massachusetts report being food insecure, which is just in a as wealthy a state as in areas that we have, to think one in three people in the state are food insecure. That's a big number.
Hmm.
So we knew the need was very high. So those are our three funding priorities. And we've funded a lot of different organizations. In the food security realm, we funded an organization called Spoonfuls, which is a food recovery organization. They try and get food that would be otherwise discarded from grocery stores and farms and other things, and distribute it to food pantries and other places that are working with clients who are food insecure. For housing stability, one of the organizations we funded was Metro West Mediation, which works with people who are renting and landlords to try and save people from being evicted and address the problems before people are homeless. So they are trying to stop the flow of homelessness by working directly with landlords and rentees. And then our third funding priority is safe spaces. And we have funded a variety of different organizations in that one. One example is Boys and Girls Clubs. We've funded one in Metro West and one in Dorchester, who are doing after school programming for kids.
I love that you've identified those three different needs because, as you mentioned, they're prevalent within Massachusetts, and being able to support the organizations that are helping to hopefully fill the gap a little bit, I think is incredibly important.
Yeah, thanks. Well, we started the foundation out of nothing, and it was an interesting conversation to say, what do we want to support? We could support anything. Sincere obviously has for digital brands, and so we thought, well, we could do something with the environment, right? Because we're a digital company, software company. But it was post-pandemic, and it really was clear that there are so many basic needs that are still unmet in our communities. Um, and since sincere corporations, those brands are about celebrating memories and milestones, we've sort of thought we want to envision a world where everyone has the ability to do that. But if you're not sure where your next meal is coming from, if you're not sure where you're going to sleep at night, or if you're not safe in your environment, who cares about celebrating milestones, right? I mean, it's not your first
Yeah.
priority. So until we can do that, we envision a world where everyone can celebrate those memories and milestones. So we are supporting the organizations that are helping to make that possible for people.
Definitely. And do you see those areas of focus kind of changing through the coming years? Are they, I'd say, concrete where they're always going to be those three areas that you focus on, or could you see potentially expanding into new
Yeah,
spaces depending on what's needed?
it's a great question. And I think that nothing is set in stone.
Mm,
Um, we certainly are open to conversation in it about changing the priorities or refining them in some way. But we're so new that we're still figuring that out for ourselves. We're still seeing what organizations are even applying to us, and what kind of proposals we're getting. So absolutely, we could make some refining, do some refinements and make some changes along the way, because we want to be nimble as a foundation, just as the company is nimble, to be able to address and react to changes as they occur.
absolutely. And so, say that there is a nonprofit listening to this podcast episode who falls within one of
Yeah,
those three areas. What would
yeah,
be their process for being able to apply? Is there like a application period or is it always rolling? I'd love you to walk through what that might
yeah.
look like.
So they should start by visiting the website, sincere.com/foundation. And there we outline what we will and won't fund, what our sort of general criteria is. And then we have a link to our grant application process that is laid out, asking people to submit a narrative, cover letter, narrative, summary sheet, the budget information, some other supplemental information, and we accept those proposals twice in the year. Once in February or March. This year, it's February 28th is our deadline. And then once in September, and it's September 12th this year is the deadline for the fall.
Perfect. And so I think it's nice to have two of those periods so that way it gives the organizations multiple times a year to be able to apply and if they're launching
Yeah.
new especially.
Yeah. And I mean, we do ask organizations to apply only once per calendar year. So if an organization applies in the spring and doesn't receive funding, we ask them to wait until the following calendar year to apply again, as opposed to, just applying again in the fall.
Mhm.
We want to make sure that we are allowing space for lots of different organizations to have a chance to submit proposals.
Totally. And so, with it being the middle of February as of the time that we're recording this, what are
Yeah.
some exciting things that are coming up for their foundation in 2025?
Well, we are excited to be funding some more organizations this year. We have now funded over $500,000 in our various grant cycles, so we're excited to increase that even more. We also just hired our first, besides me, staff member, a program manager who's starting at the end of the month, which I am thrilled about. Um, we are excited to start doing some site visits with organizations that we've been working with, to understand a little bit more about the work they're doing, the needs that they have, which are sometimes easier to understand when you're there as opposed to just reading about it in a 3-page grant proposal.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, those are some of the things that we have. I mean, the grant cycle in February and the grant cycle in September. We're excited to see what comes to us because when we first started, we weren't sure who was going to apply. Like, who knows about us, right? We weren't sure
right.
how many applications we'd get, and it's been steadily increasing, which is wonderful, but also very hard because it makes our job of selecting the grantees even harder when you're looking at all these wonderful organizations that have such high need populations they're working with.
Yes, definitely. And that's a great point too about being so new, being able to just get seen by the organizations that might need your support. So, would you say
Yeah.
that it involved a little bit of outreach on the foundation's end just to get visibility out? What was that like?
Absolutely. So when we did our first grants, we basically, as a foundation, selected three organizations that were representative of our three different funding priorities. We went to them and said, we'd like to make a gift to your organization. And then we were able to publicize those. And in a lot of ways, just those first three individual grants that we did for those organizations helped us immensely get the word out, because then of
Mm.
course it was posted on nonprofit news, other things, and people saw it. And as a former fundraiser myself, I understand you're always looking for new foundations coming into the field to say, who else can I try? What other money is out there that I could potentially apply for?
Mhm. Yeah. And so I think that was a really smart move to just reach out to organizations to start and just kind of give them money and then kind of get the ball rolling with potential
Yes.
organizations that would apply.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've been seeing a steady increase in the number of applications we receive with each funding cycle, which is fantastic. We still continue to do a little bit of marketing, sincere is marketing, but also trying to get the word out about the foundation, because one of the things that we are very cognizant of is making sure that we are not concentrating our funding in any one area of the state. Now,
Mm.
there are so many organizations in the greater Boston area because it's Boston, there's so many people here. But we are also very aware that there are real needs in central Massachusetts and eastern Massachusetts as well. And we would love to see more applications from Western Mass and Central Mass, because the bulk of that we get is really the eastern part of the state. But we understand that need is statewide. So there's probably more we can be doing to get the word out for organizations that aren't within a 50-mile radius of us.
Right. But I think it's wonderful that you are mindful of that, of wanting to expand the geographic horizons to different areas of the state so that way anyone really has the opportunity to apply for this.
Yeah, yeah, that's what we hope. That's what we hope people feel when they find out about our foundation.
Absolutely. And also exciting to hear that you'll be having your first team member joining you at the end of this
Yes,
month.
yeah.
I'd love to hear how you juggled everything being a one-person show.
Well, and honestly, I work part-time for the foundation, and so it was a lot to juggle just myself. It is continues to be. When we had over 100 applications, that I was the only one reading every one of them was a lot to handle.
Mhm.
But fun for me in a weird way. As I said, I mentioned my background in fundraising. I spent 20 plus years doing fundraising for organizations in the greater Boston area. So I have an understanding of how much work it takes to be writing grant applications, submitting them, looking for new grant opportunities, and just how much effort it takes to do fundraising for organizations. So I've certainly brought that background to bear when setting up the foundation. I hope that people see the grant application and think, oh, this is pretty straightforward. We're not asking you to do a lot of extra work for us. Nobody needs that.
Yeah.
Um, and also our commitment to general operating support. That's definitely something I brought to the table to say, this is what organizations need. So many foundations focus just on programmatic support, saying, we will fund only this specific program or initiative of your organization. And we as a foundation are saying, we'll give you general operating support. We understand that you need money to keep the lights on. We know you need money to pay your staff. We know you need money to put paper in the copier if that's what you need. So it's up to the organizations to use that money where they see fit. We don't restrict it just to program support.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that because from the nonprofits that I've worked with as a consultant, that's one thing that I see when they apply for grants is that they can't use it for like admin expenses or anything like that. And it's almost I feel like counterintuitive because if they don't have the money to pay for the staff or resources, how can they make that program even happen? So
Exactly.
it's a struggle.
Yes, exactly. I absolutely agree with you, because so many, especially when you're talking about organizations that are offering wraparound services for their clients or after school programming. So much of the program depends on the staff who's administering it, right? They're employing talented, really educated, wonderful clinicians or therapists or social work, people who bring so much expertise to the work they're doing. So, you should be able to use it for staffing costs if you need to. Because a lot, as you said, the programs don't happen if you don't have the people to produce them.
Yes, absolutely. And this question is more general in terms of any organization that's applying for funding. But since you have so much experience within this sector and also reviewing hundreds of applications, what are some things that would you say helps make an application stand out? Like if it's something
Yeah.
that an organization does that you're like, oh my gosh, I love this.
Yeah. So one of the first things I'll say is in our application, we include a bonus question. And before this year, it was a question about, what Muppet from the original Muppet Show best represents your organization and why. And now it's about, if you were a dinosaur, if your organization were a dinosaur, you can make up any dinosaur, what would be its most interesting or ridiculous feature? And that relates back to one of Sincere's brands is Time Hop, which is a memories app or photo
Mhm.
app that you can swipe through your memories from that day, however many years ago. And Abe is the dinosaur from that. So that relates back. But all that to say, the organizations that have fun with that question, that give us a little sense of the personality of the organization, are definitely ones that we look twice at. We want organizations to have fun with that question. So much of grant application is more dry, facts and figures. It's this many clients served or this much produce distributed, et cetera, et cetera. So to get a sense of the personality behind with the organization and the people doing the work is always just makes it more fun. Hopefully on their side too to write it, but definitely more fun on our side as we're reviewing it. And I would say overall, just good storytelling, and that is something storytelling has become sort of a buzzword in fundraising in recent years. But it is true, people who are able to write a compelling narrative, not just based on like the number of people served or then those kinds of things, but really give reviewers a sense of like these are the families, individuals, people impacted by the work we're doing, and these are the positive outcomes we see. um, those strike a chord with reviewers for sure.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a great point there with being able to tell the story, be able to really paint the picture of the why behind the organization, and
Yeah,
from what it sounds like, hit upon the application reviewers' emotions and feelings and draw them in that
yeah,
way.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And like I said, it's more fun for everyone if you are having fun writing the grant proposal. And it's clear those those that we get that people had fun writing it and had fun and really feel passionately about the work that they're doing. And then some we get that it's just so dry and you think, oh, they were not having they're not having a lot of fun delivering these services, are they?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like that an organization will get the most impact when you can truly see and feel their passion and excitement about what they do.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I'd love to take a step back and talk about
Yeah.
you as a professional and your career and what led you to this point. So I know you mentioned you have more than 20 years of experience in this sector. And so I'd love to hear how you got started and then also maybe the transition that happened in your career that led you to the foundation.
Yeah. So I sort of fell into fundraising as a lot of people sort of talk about. I was a women's studies and sociology double major in college. And what do you do with that? Well, apparently I like studying people and groups. Uh, and understanding group dynamics is a big part of fundraising, honestly, and relationship building. So it seemed like a natural fit for me. I worked very beginning of my career, I worked for Planned Parenthood League of Massachusetts. And I just really wanted to work for that organization. They happened to have a job opening in the development department. So I applied and got it and learned a lot about fundraising when I was there. And then over the years, I've also worked Boston Landmarks Orchestra, From the Top, which is a organization based in Boston that features young classical musicians. I worked for Boston Children's Chorus. And I worked most recently for the Framingham History Center in Framingham, Massachusetts, a cultural organization, a real gem for the Metro West area.
Oh, that's awesome. So it sounds like you have a musical interest or a musical background with the
Yeah.
organizations you worked for.
Yeah, I mean, I love the arts. I really
Yeah.
do. I think the arts are so important, especially, most of I have a blended family and we have four kids and most of them play music just because I think it's a really important part of developing people to have an appreciation for the arts, whether it's music, dance, art. But Yeah, I had a background as a dancer, and I also played music in high school, so I have an affinity for the arts. It's not that I worked for Boston Landmark Orchestra. I never played at that level, anything like that, but I appreciate it and certainly believe the arts deserve to be funded. And of course, once you start working for one arts organization, you have connections to other ones, which is why I sort of hopped around between a couple.
Absolutely. And from your last career, what was it that led you to this opening with the foundation? I think you mentioned that you helped start the foundation. Is that right?
Yeah, that is true. So, actually, the Matt Douglas, the CEO of Sincere, is my husband. So
Oh, no
this was,
way.
it was one of those, we talked about it a lot, and he finally said, "We'll do this," but he also said, "Then I want you to run it." And I said, "Well,
Mhm.
that's not exactly what I had in mind when I encouraged you to start a corporate foundation." But yeah, I mean, what a great opportunity, right? To
Yeah.
move from in the philanthropy equation from the side of asking for money to the side of being able to grant money. And I was excited to be able to bring my background of fundraising and understanding of what organizations need and want to the application process and to the funding process. So one of the things I appreciate the most is when I hear from grant seekers saying, "Oh, your application is so straightforward. I really appreciated that it wasn't a lot of work, and I'm like, great,
Yeah.
wonderful. That's exactly what we were going for."
Yes, absolutely. I think that's wonderful. And it also seems to me like I imagine, at least hopefully, that other corporations are seeing what Sincere is doing and perhaps being inspired to start their own foundation within their companies too.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, it is, I encourage everyone, obviously, as a fundraiser, I encourage everyone to be philanthropic.
Mhm.
But sometimes it's hard to understand where to start. And if your company's modeling philanthropy, hopefully that helps people, that can help people make decisions about what they're going to do with their philanthropy, or even understand that philanthropy is an option. A lot of
Mhm.
people don't understand that they can be part of a solution for a community by donating to organizations that are or nonprofits that are doing this work. So, yeah, I think it's wonderful when more corporations are very upfront about the giving that they're doing. And transparent about the process of their giving so that it's not some closed door backroom thing that organizations have easy access to applying for those grants and opportunities.
Absolutely. And for anyone who's listening to this episode who may be interested in pursuing a career in philanthropy like yourself, what advice would you have for them for just getting started?
Well, it's been so long since I started in this field, but as the old adage is true that fundraisers are always necessary, right?
Mhm.
There are nonprofits that are looking for money, and people who are comfortable asking for money and creating the opportunities for people to support organizations will always be in demand. There are some great professional organizations, development professional organizations in the greater Boston area. So I would check some of those out. Women in Development of Greater Boston is one. Association of Fundraising Professionals is another. There are some great networking opportunities within some of those professional groups. And I just always used things like higherculture.org in Massachusetts, which is specific to Massachusetts about um, job opportunities for arts and culture organizations, which is a great resource that a lot of people don't know about. So I would say, as long as you're comfortable building relationships with people and comfortable hearing no as much as you're comfortable hearing yes, you can be very successful in
Yeah,
fundraising.
Yeah, that reminds me of one of my favorite quotes, which is, if you don't ask, the answer is always no. And I feel like that's so
Right?
relevant to fundraising.
Absolutely. As I always say to people, whether or not it's fundraising for a nonprofit or fundraising for investment for a for-profit company, you are just giving people an opportunity. If you're not
Mhm.
asking for money, right, to change that lens and say, I'm offering you an opportunity. And what a wonderful opportunity this is. It's so much easier to ask someone and present it that way than to be like, oh, I really need that money. I need that support. If you're just offering this wonderful opportunity, how can people say no?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm curious to hear too, because I feel like this would impact me if I were to be a corporate employee, but I feel like anyone who's looking for a job, who sees a potential employer, who is putting their money where their mouth is and doing something like Sincere is doing, I feel like that's great for like hiring and recruiting and retaining employees, just knowing that their employer is really, really doing what they can to support local communities.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to that so much myself because I'm not on the corporate hiring side, but I have heard anecdotally from other people in the company that more and more people, as they're interviewing, are mentioning that they see the foundation and excited that Sincere has a foundation and is doing that work in the community, which I am thrilled to hear. Obviously, I think supporting nonprofits is something we all should be doing because they are giving back to our communities in ways that we don't even know. So when we can make that more commonplace and more routine for employers and companies, fantastic. But I have heard that people are happy and excited when they find out Sincere has a corporate foundation, and I'm thrilled.
Yeah, that's amazing. Rebecca, as we get closer to the end of this episode, I love to ask our guests what their favorite businesses are to support. And so I'm curious to hear what yours are.
Yeah. Well, I suppose I can't say Sincere. It is a Framingham-based company, and they're for brands. But beyond that, I would say I got married in October, and so one of the first ones that came to mind was Stucci Jewelers in Natick Center. They redid a antique engagement ring for me. Had been my great grandmother's. They
Oh,
updated
great.
it and created our wedding band. So I mean, I love them. They were great to work with. And I've been getting to know Natick Center. I moved to Natick a year and a half ago, I think it was. And there's a store called Five Crows in downtown Natick Center, which is a great. They work with a lot of different artisans. They just have some really interesting stuff in that store. So that's another one that I've been going to more recently.
I love it. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining me on today's show. I would now love to give you the opportunity to share where people can go to learn more about the Sincere Foundation online and where they can reach out to you if they'd like to chat further.
Yeah. So you can go to sincere.com/foundation, and that gives you all the information about our grant cycles, our application process. And there's also a button on there that says contact us, and you can click that, and that email will get to me or our new program manager when she starts. So I encourage people to check that out and check out sincere.com and learn about the 4 different family of brands that support the organization. We've got Punch Bowl, we've got Lovebird, Time Hop, and Memento. So those are great resources for people if they're cruising around the web.
Amazing. And I will link to all those places in the show notes that where listeners can click through and connect from there. But thank you so much again for coming on today's show.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It was wonderful to talk with you.